I'm Fiona Sherwood. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Dasseti, and I am joined today by my colleague Aurelien.
Hi, everyone. Very nice meeting you all. I'm heading up the client solution team here at Dasseti.
Do you want to tell us a bit about Dasseti, Aurelien?
Yes, absolutely. So Dasseti is a fintech company focusing on the investment management industry. What we are effectively providing is a software that streamlines the due diligence process. One of our strengths from the beginning is really the ability to digitize a questionnaire. And so it's really helped our clients streamline their end-to-end due diligence process. We've also expanded to offer other solutions related to ESG. ESG is a very hot topic in many jurisdictions, and also capturing holding level, as we call it. So information at the portfolio company level for those asset allocators investing in private equity funds, for example. And on the other side, we've been working on a solution that's been live for a few years now to help asset managers complete due diligence questionnaires or RFPs in a much more efficient way with a concept of a QA bank and an autofill of a questionnaire that they receive.
Great, thank you. And so today, the purpose of today's call is we are talking about best practice, top tips for allocators and consultants when they are designing due diligence questionnaires. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And we obviously have quite a few years of experience. That's really the clients we cover and the space that we cover. What we've realized through the last 6 years really is clients have different questionnaires, different ways of asking questions, different expectations in terms of how much data they need to complete a due diligence process. And during this call, what we wanted to do is really share the best practices so that both sides, find more efficiencies in that process. On one side, you have the allocators who need some information, typically as quickly as possible, because they do want to go to maybe an investment committee to make an investment decision. And on the other side, you have the managers receiving maybe 10, 15, 20, 100 of due diligence questionnaires, and they need to be able to complete all of them in the right time frame and with sufficient information for those allocators to make the decision. So the point here is really we can help both sides through our solution and through a few tips to improve that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are particularly and personally very knowledgeable in this area, aren't you?
Yes, that's right. So in terms of background, before joining Dasseti, I spent over 10 years at ADIA performing due diligence across all the asset classes that ADIA covers, from the most public and most liquid asset classes, to the most illiquid, whether it's a fund investment, a managed account investment, a direct holding in a real estate. So we've sent a lot of questionnaires as a team, and yes, I can absolutely share some tips in terms of how in my previous role as well, we looked at our questionnaires and tried to ensure we make the process more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's a partnership, isn't it, between the requester and the manager? So not a dictatorship.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's absolutely right.
Great. So the first recommendation, I think, is it to limit the number of questions in a questionnaire? And is that important, the length of the questionnaire? And how can allocators keep their questionnaires concise but still get the data that they need?
Absolutely. And that's a very important question to ask, and it's a very difficult answer to provide. Because on one side, you really have the allocators who ideally want information on everything. The more information they have, the better, really, to do their analysis. And on the other side, you have the managers who, again, like we said earlier, are receiving a lot of requests and need to manage expectation across all of them, right? It's really finding that right balance. And ideally, an allocator would send as few questions as possible so that it's easier for the managers to complete. But in this case, they may not have enough information. So it's really finding that right balance. And generally speaking, what I would say in the industry is that we can break it down, the number of questions, between a pre-investment work and post-investment. So pre-investment work, there is typically more appetite for managers to respond to a lengthy questionnaire. They understand that there can be a significant commitment in terms of capital and in terms of a relationship. These investments can sometimes last 10, 15 years, especially in closed-end fund structures. So there is a lot more appetite to respond to lengthy questionnaires. When it comes to monitoring, the investment has been made, obviously based on a lengthy and on a very thorough due diligence by an allocator. The expectation is here that the questionnaires are shorter and they're more to capture meaningful changes. And by sending shorter questionnaire, typically the idea is that the allocators identify areas where things have changed, and then based on that, decide if more questions are needed, right? And that sort of logic typically works really well. It's very hard to give you a number, but I would say a questionnaire with 150 questions for pre-investments seems about right or reasonable, together with files, because a system like Dasseti, a platform like Dasseti, also allows managers to provide as many files as they want. And on a post-investment basis, if it's a quarterly questionnaire, and that's where now the frequency is important, right? So on a monitoring basis, are you sending questionnaires monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, right? In the more traditional investment space, a long or short equity fund, a long only equity strategies, a short monthly questionnaire is typically acceptable, or a slightly longer quarterly questionnaire, right? When you move into the more illiquid space, the more private market space, if you have a private equity strategy, a real estate strategy, an infrastructure fund, the most relevant frequency here would be probably semi-annually or annually, because those investments, and that's also how we advise our clients, these investments don't change on a day-to-day. A private equity fund doesn't change its holdings every day, right? Those holdings tend to be quite static. So that's how we typically advise our clients to manage the number of questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting you talk about sort of multi-strategy. So I was just going to ask you, obviously some allocators have multiple strategies. How can they ensure that that's manageable for fund managers if the fund manager is offering different strategies as well? Because they're going to get multiple versions of a very similar questionnaire.
Absolutely. And that's a very good point, especially on the post-investment side, because pre-investment, an allocator wouldn't typically look at 10 different strategies with a given manager, but it's very likely that over time, as an allocator continues to allocate to a manager, they end up with 5, 6, 10, 15 different investments with a given manager. And there's typically questions that they want to cover at the firm level, which are not specific. That's the word I was looking for. So which are not specific to the fund, and there are questions that are very specific to the funds, the strategies, or what we call in the system the product. Absolutely. So to give you more details here, what we advise our allocators is to be quite mindful of the number of questions again, because if you do want to capture 20 data points on 10 products, so those specific fund strategy questions, you already have 200 questions. So if now you're telling me as an allocator you want to capture 50 data points on these 10 products, you quickly go to 500 questions. So it's really how to balance the need for product specific information, and the impact of sending lengthy questionnaires. So a few solutions that we have, or a few options we typically provide to our clients, is to sometimes split their RFP or their questionnaire cycle between asset classes. This way they can cover maybe 2-3 funds within the long only space in one questionnaire cycle, and a few months later cover another asset class, which could be, again, alternatives or private equity.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I guess it's the same team often responding to each of these questionnaires, and, they're just going to find themselves overwhelmed, aren't they? So...
They will, and it's the same investor relations team for sure. There may be different subject matter experts, but at the end of the cycle as well, you still have typically a compliance function reviewing all the answers. So you still have quite a few individuals that need to be involved on any due diligence questionnaires. Also, yeah,
exactly.
there is a high overlap.
Yeah, I can imagine that getting tedious very quickly.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so is there something that allocators should consider when they're structuring yes/no questions? Should they be making questions mandatory? Have you got any advice on that?
Yes, absolutely. So, and that's a good point to also give more details on how questionnaires can be digitized. I guess in our platform, our allocators are able to send more structured questionnaire. So the questionnaire structure allows our clients to send text questions, number questions, table questions, file questions, as we discussed earlier, and also what we would call, generally speaking, multiple choice questions. They can be, to your point, a yes, no. They can be a drop down with an option to choose from, and they could be multiple choices. And when these questions are asked, the benefits for the allocators is really to get consistent data across all their responses and to be able to quickly review on a given response, but also maybe to compare to previous responses or to compare to other managers. So there's lots of benefits. On the other side, what we advise our managers is to make sure there is also an alternative for the managers to respond. That alternative would typically be at least a non-applicable or an other category, because by trying to get consistent data, you sometimes have a risk that some of the options you're providing to your managers are not the right ones, right? So how do you allow them to provide another answer, especially if you make these questions mandatory and none of the options are the one that a manager want to select, you are in a difficult situation, right? So that's typically the advice we give. Give an alternative, typically an NA or an other category where the manager can provide even more details in writing.
Yeah, because I can imagine you'd force a manager to respond in a way that wasn't actually correct. So you wouldn't get good data out of the end of that, would you? So, okay.
Exactly.
I mean, that brings me on to the next point, which is sort of talking about clarity. So I guess it's kind of recapping on what you've said, but how can allocators get detailed, useful responses, and how can they allow flexibility? I mean, you just touched on that briefly there, but are there any other tips and sort of hints?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a good segue from the earlier point where I was discussing the question type and the structure and the consistency, because that consistency comes up with also some limitations where if you're asking for a number to a specific question, in a way you're ensuring you're getting a number. So you're reducing potentially the back and forth with the manager because it's clearer to the manager and you're getting the right information. But some managers do want to provide additional context, a disclaimer, how the calculation was made, and as of date. And that's true for, again, a number question, but it could be true for, a multiple choice question like we were discussing earlier. When a question is not structured as a text open form question, what we sometimes advise our clients is to also provide a comment section. That comment section, especially on a number question, for example, will allow exactly what we just said, which is will allow the manager to provide the extra details that are required to support the number being provided.
And to give that clarity, yeah. I mean, it might feel like more work to review those responses, but actually the clarity of the response is that much clearer.
Absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah. So I guess that takes me on to the next point, which is about managing deadlines. Of course, allocators want the information and they want it by a certain deadline. They want to close off that due diligence exercise and move on to the reviews. How can they ensure that managers are meeting those deadlines? We're all human, everyone's busy. How can they handle late responses but keep things on track?
So I think one thing to highlight with digitizing a due diligence process. So I guess bringing a process from being manual, as some allocators continue to do, which is sending emails and sending DDQs offline, to a platform like Dasseti, is the ability to automate a lot of the admin process, right? So the process really helps our clients, our allocators, build questionnaire templates, send these questionnaires through the platform, and also track the receipt on the other side and to automatically receive the responses on the platform. So that removes a lot of this admin process. Going back to your point on the deadlines, you can also automate the reminders that are being sent to your clients. And those reminders are actually based on the deadline. So if you're giving 2 weeks to a manager to complete a questionnaire, our clients can then decide, when do I want to send reminders? Do I want to send them before the deadline? Again, maybe 7 days, 5 days, 3 days. The options are there. And also after deadline. One very important component of managing questionnaires in our platform is the deadlines, right? The deadlines is a tool to ensure the other side knows what your expectations are as an allocator. But it should be, in many cases, flexible, right? So our platform allows our allocators, when designing questionnaires, to decide whether they want to allow the managers to submit responses after deadline or not. So again, the flexibility is there. There are very valid reasons for allocators to impose a response before the deadline, but there are so many reasons to potentially allow a manager to respond after the deadline. So we can offer both options to our clients through the platform.
Yeah, because I can imagine if you're running an RFP process, you need those responses in by the deadline so that you can make a decision. Whereas if you're doing a operational due diligence questionnaire, it's a bit more flexible. So you could give that flexibility to the managers.
Exactly. And the deadline can be changed. I mean, you're bringing a good point. But the other thing I guess I didn't mention is that deadline can be changed in the system as well. So as the managers receive the questionnaires and they see the deadline, they can also inform their allocators that based on the flow of questionnaires they've received and potentially holidays and people being on leave, that deadline is not necessarily achievable. And they can come to a mutually agreeable date, and that date can be changed by our clients in the platform and then reflected on the manager side as well.
Yeah, they're completely in control, aren't they? Nothing is fixed.
Exactly.
What is a typical deadline, by the way? What would be a reasonable deadline?
I would say and we go back to how many questions are being asked, but I would say on a 150 questionnaire, a 2 to 3 week timeline is relatively reasonable. On a monitoring questionnaire, where it could be just 10, 20 questions, 1 to 2 weeks is typically what we see.
Yeah. So you've talked about different question types, and you also sort of mentioned that managers can attach files. So what types of data or what sort of formats of data, can you expand on that a little bit? What can be built into the platform to allow alternative data sources, data types?
So as we discussed earlier, we provide quite a few options to our allocators when they want to design a questionnaire. If they want a text answer, if they want a numeric answer, if they want a table answer, right? So we have quite a few options available to our clients. Quite almost any option one person could think of. One additional option we wanted to give to the managers is to provide additional files for reference. Sometimes a manager may want to provide a text answer to a text question, but that answer can be very lengthy and not necessarily easy to digest in the system. And managers may be worried that by just including 1 or 2 paragraphs, the allocators may miss some of the picture, right? So what we've also allowed for in the platform is to attach any files that the managers want to attach. Again, similar to the deadlines that can be changed. This is also a setting that can be set up as part of the design of the questionnaire. So the allocators remain in control. If they do want the managers to only provide a text answer, they can. If they decide to allow the managers to provide any additional attachments to support the responses, that's also a possibility. In terms of advice, we would typically advise our clients to keep that on so that they have more information. The information comes straight into the platform. It comes as a file. It's automatically saved under the company and or the product. So there's lots of benefits and very limited administrative steps associated with receiving additional files in the system.
Yeah, that's true. We've got some quite neat automatic filing capabilities, haven't we? I forgot to ask.
Maybe one thing I forgot to mention, you can also search these documents. So the platform has a smart search, a global search functionality. So the more information you have during the platform, I would say, generally speaking, for an allocator, the better it is.
Right. So you can search across files for keywords, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah, useful. I forgot to ask you before, we talk a lot at Dasseti about pre-filling, don't we? Could you just sort of explain, what we mean by pre-filling a questionnaire and the benefits of doing so?
Absolutely. And here we go back to Dasseti trying to build an ecosystem where on one side you have the allocators sending questionnaires who need to find efficiencies, and on the other side you really have the managers receiving questionnaires and who've been used to a process that's not necessarily the most efficient and who are looking into potentially using platforms that provide efficiencies, right? And so the pre-filling is really here to show the manager that there are lots of benefits for them to respond to questionnaires online through Dasseti as opposed to doing it manually. So to give you more details in terms of how it actually works, the allocators, when they ask questions, have the ability to turn on a pre-fill. By turning on a pre-fill, what they effectively do is that they pre-fill the responses to a new questionnaire that they're sending to a manager based on responses they've already received from that manager or based on data they are currently storing in the system. So if your question is, who are you regulated by, as one of the questions, and our allocators have already captured that the manager is regulated by the SEC, or they've received a response in the past saying that from that manager that it is regulated by the SEC, they can resend that questionnaire as part of their monitoring process, for example, pre-populating the answer so that all the managers have to do really is accept the questionnaire, go through the responses that are already pre-populated, make sure they're correct, and or make some slight edits and resubmit the responses.
That's great. Yeah. And I think sort of a bit later, I think you might be talking about some sort of new features that we have that further enhance that pre-filling function.
Absolutely. And other than the pre-filling functionality, which helps the managers complete these RFPs in a more efficient manner, there's a few other, even if the allocators are not pre-filling those questionnaires as they are being sent, the managers still have a few other options. To the extent that they've responded to other questionnaires in the past, they can reuse these other answers. All the questionnaires they've responded to as a manager that may have come from 10 or 15 different companies, those responses are stored in the system, in their system, on their side, right? So they can use what we call a use previous answer functionality, or they can use a smart search functionality that effectively checks the question being asked, checked the other questions that they've responded to in the past, and offers a few options based on a similarity score so that the manager can quickly identify similar questions and use those previous answers to populate the new questionnaire.
And that's, just to clarify, that's available to all managers responding in the Dasseti platform. It's not a paid feature.
Absolutely. It's free.
Yeah.
It comes by default.
And we get some really good feedback about that, don't we?
We do.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to sort of touch on how our platform, specifically Dasseti COLLECT, helps allocators to make sense of the data once it comes back in the form of responses, because we've got quite a few features there, haven't we?
We do. We do. We have we have a few functionalities. We have scoring functionalities and we have flagging functionalities. So all these functionalities really help the allocators upon receipt of the responses to almost do an exception-based reporting in a way, or to quickly identify what are potentially the areas where they want to spend more time, what are the areas that seems absolutely fine, and whether they're already traveling and ready to meet a manager and receiving a response, or they're in the office looking to allocate a due diligence work to a colleague. That's very, very helpful to really manage the workload.
Yeah. And then just sort of going back to that exciting AI enhancement of Dasseti COLLECT and Engage and ESG, but let's just talk about a little bit about what the AI enhancements mean for allocators sending questionnaires.
This tool is really a tool that will really scrape any document that an allocator has already available. And so the way it will work is, even before sending a questionnaire, an allocator can already maybe scrape a few documents that they've already received. So if you take an example of an operational due diligence team, typically they intervene a lot later in the due diligence process than an investment due diligence team. So those companies typically have few documents already within the building. And so in this case, the ODD team can bring that document in the platform, scrape the data, pre-fill the questionnaires effectively with some responses, and send questionnaires to the managers that are pre-filled. So that scraping tool is very valuable to our clients. We're also going to be making it available to the managers. So to the extent that you're a manager receiving a questionnaire as well, and our clients haven't used it, or you have other documents that can help you pre-fill these questionnaires, you'll also be able to load these documents in the platform, scrape the data, and pre-fill on your side the questionnaire so that you can respond more quickly.
It just gives you more options as a manager, doesn't it, as to where you pull the data from and how quickly you can get that. Because if you've got your sort of bank of approved documents, you can then use the tool to look across those and pull in the right data. I mean, I can see some huge time savings with that. It's exciting. It's exciting times, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's always been our vision, which is building an ecosystem where both sides see benefits. I mean, a platform, streamlining a due diligence process by introducing a new tool requires both sides to participate. An allocator that does a due diligence need the manager to provide information, right? So the goal that we have as an organization is, how do we connect the two sides, and how do we enhance the experience on both sides, right? And this scraping tool, this AI scraping tool that we're talking about, goes in the same direction, is helping really both sides.
Yeah, because ultimately the overarching goal of an allocator is to fairly assess a set of managers so that they can make the best investment decision possible. And if they can do more or assess more fairly, that gives a broader scope of managers a chance to sell their products, if you like. So I think it is making it more equitable and fair for the whole industry, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Anything to add?
No, not really. I mean, first, thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. We're always keen to hear anything that, again, we know, we obviously speak to many of our clients, and we have built a strong base of clients, and we have, we through our client relationship work, we obviously gather a lot of requirements and then a lot of feedback from our clients. Our allocators are also connecting to thousands and thousands of managers, so we're also collecting feedback there. But there is always new things that come up, so we're always open to discussing things that can be improved. new ideas. So again, I just want to make sure that the audience knows as well that they can always reach out if they want to chat, if they want a bit more details on what we're working on, or if they want to share their own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. Thanks, Aurelien. Well, we'll do this again soon. Nice
Sounds
talking
good.
to you.
Likewise.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thanks, everyone.
Fiona. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.